I'm very honored to welcome you all today in the Deep Space 8K of the Ars Electronica Center to literally a world premiere. We're gonna show a wonderful piece by the Italian producer Magister Art. Today, Magister Raffaello is the topic, and we're honored to have guests here, not only from around, but also from Italy. I would like to welcome the Italian ambassador, Mr. Batani, and his wife accompanying him. And it's a great pleasure and honor to have you here. We were talking a little bit in advance that it's your second time to actually visit the Ars Electronica Festival. So last time incognito, so to speak, this time in really official connections. And we also like to welcome Dr. Fabrizio Iliano from the Cultural Institute, Italian Cultural Institute in Vienna. Without your great support and funding, this wouldn't be possible to bring here, not only here during the festival, but Magister Raffaello will follow us throughout the year. And I would also like to welcome Jelena, so now where's the second name? Jovanović. We're talking so much already on via Skype and all kind of virtual ways, but it's fantastic to have you finally here in the deep space. And I would like to pass on the words to Dr. Iliano to give us a little bit an introduction into your work, and then we'll have the speech and the presentation of Yolanda. Thank you very much.
Danke herzlich für die lieben Worte, lieber Direktor Andreas Bauer. Vielen herzlich willkommen an Sie alle. Ich möchte erwähnen, dass die Anwesenheit von Herrn Botschafter und Frau Botschafterin auch deswegen außerordentlich ist, weil wir normalerweise bei Veranstaltungen, Kulturveranstaltungen außerhalb Wiens entweder der eine oder der andere kommt. Das bedeutet also, dass wir nicht nur uns außerordentlich freuen über dieses Projekt, sondern dass wir diesem Projekt eine große, sehr große Wichtigkeit beimessen. Ich möchte mich nicht auf das Terrain der Kunsthistoriker hineinwagen, dafür ist ja Jelena Jovanović da. Aber ich möchte Ihnen vielleicht einen Gedanken und zwei Emotionen mitgeben. Der Gedanke. Wir schlafen nicht, wie man das ins Deutsche übertragene italienische Saga. Wir schlafen nicht auf den Lorbeer der Vergangenheit. Die Renaissance ist nicht statisch. Die Renaissance wirkt nach, nährt uns. Und die Renaissance kombiniert sich heutzutage auch mit den digitalen Technologien. Und die digitalen Technologien wiederum sind nicht lediglich ein Instrument zur Promotion, sondern, wie wir wahrscheinlich auch erfahren werden, zum besseren Verständnis und auch zur Forschung von Kunstwerken. Die zwei Emotionen. Ein Geheimtipp für Sie, wenn Sie nächstes Mal nach Rom reisen, und das werden Sie sicher tun, stehen Sie bitte früh auf, ganz früh, und spazieren Sie im Zentrum von Rom herum und kommen Sie zum Pantheon gegen 8 Uhr oder 8:30, je nach Jahreszeit. In dem Moment, wo das Pantheon eröffnet wird, das 2000-jährige, sehr schwere Tor wird mit theatralischer Geste von vielen Leuten eröffnet. Und sie sind vielleicht mit 2 weiteren Personen die Ersten, die das Pantheon betreten. Im Pantheon sehen Sie natürlich die bombastischen Gräber der italienischen Könige, aber ich versuche mit Ihnen ins Pantheon reinzugehen. Links liegt dieser Mann, der Mann, der diese wunderbaren Kunstwerke geschaffen hat. Sein brüderlicher Freund Pietro Bembo schrieb das Epitaph für sein Grab. Es ist von ergreifender Schlichtheit und Einfachheit. Und das heißt, Zeit seines Lebens, hier liegt Raphael begraben, Zeit seines Lebens fürchtete die Natur von ihm übertroffen zu werden. Als er dann im Sterben war, fürchtete sie mit ihm, gemeinsam mit ihm zu sterben. Das ist die erste großartige Emotion. Versuchen Sie es, das werden Sie nicht bereuen und nicht vergessen. Allein im Pantheon und dann 5 Minuten vor Raphaels Grab. Die zweite Emotion ist diese Emotion. Wenn Sie zum Beispiel die stumme Frau, um nur ein Beispiel zu nennen, die stumme Frau von Raphael im Herzogspalast in Urbino bewundert haben, können Sie kaum die Pinselführung sehen. Le pennellate non sono visibili nella pittura di Raffaello. So feingliedrig seine Arbeit war. Aber hier werden wir wahrscheinlich die Möglichkeit haben, die Pinselführung auch nahe zu sehen und zu erleben. Jelena Jovanović wird uns durch das Leben von Raphael anhand seiner Werke auch führen. Ihr Beitrag wird vor allem, soprattutto di taglio storico, so in historischer Perspektive wird Frau Dr. Jovanović sprechen, aber nicht nur. Und da freue ich mich sehr, das Wort an Jelena Jovanović zu übergeben. Danke vielmals.
Thank you, Mr. Giurlano and His Excellency Ars Electronica team, to all the friends who follow us online and here present. Magister Art want to thank you very much for this opportunity. A global journey mapping the new world. It is the theme of this year's festival. Never has been a title more appropriate to talk about Raphael and the way his journey shaped the world in time and space. The concept of the journey lays at the very foundations of the Italian Renaissance education. That was based on the discovery of sciences, new markets, and long-distance exchanges, but mostly on the research and protection of beauty and harmony that transformed artisans into artists. My name is Jelena Jovanović. I'm head of content and editorial strategy of Magister Art and art historian, and today I will lead you through the journey that Raphael undertook at the age of 14, discovering places and people that fueled his creativity and curiosity, and that in a very short time increased his fame and influence. Raphael's physical journey from his motherland Urbino to his masterland Rome, passing through Città di Castello, Perugia and Florence, is also a metaphysical inner journey from the known to the unknown, a journey that profoundly shaped the global future of the arts in the West, mapping indeed a new world, the one that Italy is honoring this year in the occasion of 500th anniversary of his death. Through the experimental languages of different media and technologies and transdisciplinary approaches, in this exhibition we have reconstructed the cultural and historical context of his art. We have done it through a perceptive restitution of the few but supreme signs he left where he passed, the landscapes he saw, the artists he admired in his pilgrimage from one city to the other of central Italy at the turn of the centuries. The credits of the production of this cognitive experience go to the artistic director Luca Mazzieri and creative director Alessandra Costantini.
The young Raphael was blessed by fortune, endowed by nature with extraordinary abilities. In addition to being a born painter and designer, he grew up alongside his father, Giovanni Santi, a highly respected artist in the city of Urbino, which at that time represented a fundamental cultural hub for the whole of Europe. Fate seems then to be completely favorable to this fabulous young man. But things, you know, don't always go as we think. On the death of his father, who had dominated the Urbino scene, the fellow painters, in order to gain space, tried to the activity of the workshop inherited by the young Raphael. He learned to fight immediately with all his strength to emerge. In fact, at the start of his career, he managed to receive commissions only in the vicinity of Urbino, but not in the city, having to emigrate from it. The ideal city invites us to travel. The great masterpiece of Italian art represents the paradigm of the cultural and artistic climate developed at the Montefeltro court in Urbino. Attributed to great painters, actually without ever being certain, the artwork never fails to fascinate viewers, especially because of its enigmatic and equally unknown use. Scenographic sketch for theatrical use, or study of perspective for architectural purposes. A circular building stands in the center of a square. There are two symmetrical wings of buildings around this mausoleum temple. This metaphysical work inspired the young Raphael, who represented in his first masterpiece, The Marriage of the Virgin. He was right in the middle of his tenacious struggle for artistic survival when he arrived in Città di Castello and conceived The Marriage of the Virgin, a painting commissioned for a church in the town, first ordered to the Perugino's workshop. However, the question is how the very young Raphael Sanzio managed in 1504 to reach a level of excellence that allowed him to stand next to the greatest masters of his time. And above all, how was he so brave to compete with Pietro Perugino, to whom all of Italy looked with admiration at that time? In fact, Raphael shows an already incredible personality for his age. He copies many elements from his master's painting. Raphael had already proved his worth, but anxiety and restlessness gave him no break. He already had in his heart the next destination of his personal journey. He did not want to stay too long in those territories that gave him few opportunities for work, and thanks to the support of the Dukes of Urbino, he managed to go to the cradle of Renaissance culture and the homeland of the arts at the time, the city of Florence. Just in that highly productive period, he was invited to the city of Perugia for a very important commission. A noble Florentine woman belonging to the richest family of the time, the Baioni family, commissioned Raphael, a glorious young man whose greatness she had heard of, to paint a fundamental work for the city and for the Italian art in general, the transport of Christ to the sepulchre. Atalanta Baioni wanted, in fact, to honor her son, Griffonetto Baioni, who had been mortally wounded following a family feud a few years before. To commemorate her missing son, she asked Raphael to paint an altarpiece dedicated to Griffonetto. A large number of preparatory drawings have come down to us, preserved in various museums around the world, where we learn about Raphael's creative process. In the first prototypes, the dead Christ is on the ground, surrounded by the beggars, but then Raphael changes his mind and, unwilling to imitate Perugino's staging, decides to totally change the register. The painting focuses on the last moment when the body of Christ is raised from the ground on a sheet and taken to the sepulchre. A little higher up we see three figures, Saint John, Nicodemus, and Mary Magdalene. The Madonna with the pious woman is on one side, fainting from pain as she watches Christ being carried on the linen shroud. Everything is made rarefied and timeless by the landscape of Mount Golgotha with the crosses in the background.
Research and protection of beauty and harmony in all his activities, from his paintings, drawings, tapestries, and architectural design to the performance of his role as prefect for antiquities of the state of the Church. He contributed to a full awareness of the need to safeguard the cultural heritage. Raphael's modernity opens up to laic and secular perspectives. The Christian narrative becomes probably for the first time completely ancillary in its supporting role. The absolute protagonist becomes the action of man, the human space, perfectly and harmonically rationalized. Silently, the secularism makes its way, the trust in the power of man before God, the crisis and conflict between man and God that modern and contemporary art will take to its extremes. His profound antiquarian culture and his ability to integrate it into modern projects is demonstrated in his architectural sections, as we have just seen, inhabiting the space and the balance of theatricality are the two founding elements of his revolution. They have no passive setting, but they double the key of interpretation. Man acquires identity and solemnity in the act of defying God with its ratio, be it a speculative ratio, the one of philosophers, or architectural or urbanistic ratio of domination of the environment. But what makes Raphael a master of narratives is one fundamental aspect. He recognized the importance of the role of the viewer at the time of the work's execution. By representing pathos and gestural communication, he reconstructed the act of performance. His iconography turns a very Christian theme, the one of the deposition, in a performing venue, sharing the persuasive rhetoric of theater and painting, and setting the stage to act emotionally and intellectually upon the viewers of the early modern Italian society.
In Florence, there was a formidable tradition that balanced the commissioning of religious and secular works. Raphael, a much sought-after portraitist, received commissions in that period mainly from a secular clientele of great families, especially businessmen. Two paintings depict respectively Agnolo Doni, a rich Florentine merchant of fabrics, and his wife, the aristocratic lady Maddalena Strozzi. The hypothesis, put forward by most critics, is to associate the painting of the portraits with the marriage of the young couple, and the painting should therefore be dated between 1504 and 1506, the year in which the furnishing of the bridal room was certainly completed. Agnolo himself gave the commission to Raphael. Living therefore in Florence, Agnolo Doni, who gladly spent the money assigned to other things, but with as much saving as he could, on things of painting and sculpture, which he enjoyed very much, had Raphael paint the portrait of himself and of his wife in the same way they wake up close to Giovan Battista, his son, in the lovely and very comfortable house that Agnolo built in Florence in Corso dei Tintori, next to the Canto de' Alberti, Vasari wrote in the Lives. Alongside the numerous portraits, in fact, we also find the great sacred works, which in a certain sense can be considered secular. Raphael painted them for important entrepreneurial families of the time, and they were consequently meant to be displayed in private houses. This is the case for the Madonna of the Goldfinch. The painting was made in the Florentine years, in which Raphael developed other variations on the topic of the group of the Madonna with Child and St. John. See, for example, the Madonna del Prato at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna and the Bella Jardinière at the Musée du Louvre in Paris. The ideal beauty of images is the harmony that unfolds in the intense exchange of glances and gestures that bind the figures and the graceful variety of the protagonists' faces, with the landscape in the background almost dissolving into the sky. This does not alter, but on the contrary, reinforces the devotional elements.
10 years old, have received a major commission from an important citizen of Città di Castello to start with, probably because he was already ahead of a workshop as a legal hire of his father's business. His first independent commissions of altarpieces were ordered by religious confraternities who owned the churches, but he was paid by members of important families for their family chapels in those churches. So as we saw, Raphael's patrons will become the popolo grosso, wealthy merchant banker families from Florence. Approaches that we use in the social theory of art, such the one of the period I, allow us to analyze the relation between artists and patrons, from which often emerges the choice for subject and style. An economic perspective suggests that it was the unprecedented increase in demand for art by wealthy patrons ready to compete for quality in an interregional market that attracted large groups of painters in towns such as Florence and Rome. The competition incentivized the artists to differentiate styles and compete in quality, where higher quality was seen as the ability to solve a series of new technical problems in the realistic reproduction of the world. Under these rules of the game, the close interaction and competition of painters strengthened indeed their innovative ability. Raphael's workshop, that was active in an extensive territory with a wide set of assistants, was a real enterprise. He introduced an innovative working method based on preliminary drawings and the execution by a team. Whether the patrons were secular or religious, the art market was to a large extent competitive, and most certainly an important factor of the artistic innovation of Renaissance was of economic nature. Now, if we zoom out from 16th century, we will inevitably make a consideration of a reverse narrative, from economic perspective to the artistic innovation, in a contemporary product-based society. We know that the end user of every product is human, whether the product is a software, a dress, or an exhibition. Renato Saporito, founder of Magister Art, often states that a narrow focus on product which dismisses the human element is unlikely to create something lasting.
Through this superb fresco, Raphael invented an idea of the afterlife, the paradise, the sages, the wise, the good, and the just. The large number of protagonists can be divided into even smaller groups, scattered within the environment thanks to the presence of the large staircase in the foreground. The division is as follows. Most philosophers and scholars are to the left for the viewer and to the right of the central protagonists. One group is in the foreground on the left of the stairs. They are probably scholars and thinkers related to the world of nature and related phenomena. Another group is in the foreground on the right of the stairs, whose field of study is still a source of discussion at present, but is thought to be related to the world of geometry. 58 scholars and philosophers, are portrayed by Raphael with the features of his contemporary artists and intellectuals, while his own self-portrait on the sidelines of the scene seems to scrutinize the composition in its cultural depth. Plato, painted with a likeness of Leonardo da Vinci, Aristotle as Bastiano da Sangallo, Socrates, Xenophon, Aeschina, Alcibiade, Zenone, Epicurus, represented as Phaedra Ingeirami, Federico Gonzaga, Averroes, Pythagoras, portrayed as Francesco Maria della Rovere, Heraclitus with the effigy of Michelangelo Buonarroti, Diogenes, Euclid as Bramante, Zoroaster with the effigy of Baldassare Castiglione, Ptolemy, Apella with the effigy of Raphael Sanzio himself, Protogenes, all surrounded also by other figures whose contemporary identities are still studied today. In the center of the composition, there are two figures discussing with each other, one with a red robe and the other with a blue robe. They are Plato and Aristotle, respectively. The first is represented with the features of Leonardo da Vinci, while he holds the Timaeus in one hand, and with the other hand points upwards towards the celestial sphere where the concept of good resides. The expulsion of Heliodorus from the temple is an emblematic biblical episode to understand the history of secular struggle between civil and religious power, and symbolizes the protection offered by God to the church against its enemies. Heliodorus of Antiochia was a minister of Seleucus IV, king of Syria, charged with desecrating the Temple of Jerusalem. Here, however, the prayer of the priest Anya at the center of the composition evokes a divine messenger on horseback, followed by two assistants on foot, who overwhelms the desecrator on the right corner of the scene. Heliodorus and his followers are crushed at the edge of the visual field, recalling some convulsive mass scenes from the Sistine Chapel vault like the bronze serpent. It is probably an allusion to the Pope's victory over the pro-French schismatic cardinals who had plotted against him. Raphael represents the story as follows. On the right side of the fresco, he paints the moment when Heliodorus is overwhelmed by the horse and put to the ground with an overturned vase from which gold coins come out. An angel seems to glide down from heaven, but without resting on the large marble floor. On the left side, Pope Julius II watches impassively the scene, sitting on the litter surrounded by other figures watching the epilogue. In the center, the priest Anya, in the light of the candles, begins to pray, invoking divine help. No one can take what belongs to the Church without facing the risk of being defeated by the pontiff's army, led by divine faith. What is impressive is how Raphael masterfully represents the episode by inserting the figure of the Pope. The main fresco tells of Pope Leo the Great, who managed to tame a fire that had devastated the Borgo district, where St. Peter's and the papal residence are located. An interesting indication is enclosed here. The death of Julius II, who was succeeded by Leo X, the Medici Pope, son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, occurred between Heliodorus's room and the Borgo's room. He was a completely different man from Julius II. If we try to go back to Heliodorus' room, we realize that the last fresco in the room makes a clear reference to the newly elected pontiff. Tradition has it that Leo the Great confronted Attila the Barbarian and convinced him to leave Rome, and in fact in the fresco in Heliodorus's room, in the face of Leo the Great, there is the face of Leo X, who had just been elected to the pontificate. The master radically changed his language and began to focus rather on narrative than on characters. In fact, the scene is overcrowded, and the composition totally turns towards the joy of the story, towards a multiplicity of characters, and graphically exalts the complexity of the episodes, like a sort of graphic novel antilitterum.
According to Goethe, in his voyage to Italy, trying to understand the school of Athens is like trying to read Homer from an ancient manuscript. This expresses actually the question of how to read and interpret this masterpiece. When the fresco was finished, many humanists, such as Tommaso Inghirami, gathered around Pope Julius II and read it quite easily, as Raphael was able to represent the full Renaissance humanistic spirit, shaped by old literature, Neoplatonic philosophy, and the elite canons of Renaissance culture. For this reason, despite not having a classical education, he did not know Greek and only a little Latin, and being a painter in a craftsman acception of a man using hands, this 26-year-old master was considered almost like those that indeed studied finance and enjoyed art. Somehow, the creator of the natural historical link between ancient Rome and Rome as created by Julius II. As we have seen, Raphael paid tribute to his enlightened but very different patrons of his highest institutional commissions, Pope Julius II and then Leo X, by depicting them directly on the scenes of the Vatican stanze. The whole operation was obviously a part of a bigger agenda. He also introduced new types of presentation of portraits and new psychological situations of his sitters, as seen in, let's say, a friendly and informal portrait of Julius II in 1511 and Leo X with two cardinals in 1519. Leo X commissioned Raphael to design 10 large tapestries to decorate the walls of the Sistine Chapel, meant to become an iconic work in the canon of Italian Renaissance art. Raphael's last phase began around 1515, just 1 year after the completion of the Heliodorus room, when Leo X appointed him as a prefectus antiquitatum, that is, a superintendent of ancient monuments, often damaged since the Middle Ages, to obtain nothing more but building material. Raphael had accumulated incomparable knowledge and understanding of the genius loci of ancient and Christian Rome, and began this task that he never actually completed.
James, John, and Peter are on high ground, bowing down to the dazzling divine manifestation of Jesus, and lie on the ground confused and frightened. Christ is flanked by the supernatural manifestations of Moses and Elijah, prophets whose words predicted the event. At the edge of the hill on the left, two saints are present at the vision, while the sun sets inexorably on the right side of the sky. At the bottom instead, the 9 apostles who have gone at the foot of Mount Tabor receive the demonized boy, accompanied by his parents, and try to help him in vain. In summary, the upper part of the work is occupied by the transfiguration scene, while the lower part shows the episode of the obsessed boy healed by Jesus. The 2 episodes of Luke's Gospel take place on the same day, while in the Gospels of Mark and Matthew, Jesus meets the possessed person only on his return from the mountain. Raphael composes 2 episodes taken from the Gospel of Matthew, creating an absolute iconographic precedent. Jesus is not simply illuminated by a divine light, but he transforms that light into himself and illuminates humanity. The upper part of the work celebrates the victory of hope, while the darkness and evil opposing to the upper brightness are narrated descending downwards. We really conceived this story as if it was an Ouroboros, a snake biting its own tail, maybe because this is indeed his story. At the end, he returned to the beginning of his journey. Raphael, the young disciple, who soon became a master, attended by numerous talented disciples in his workshop, left his life eventually remaining immortal.
Story of an existence interrupted at the highest peak of a renewed energy that makes us think of the life of a Renaissance artist, but also of other revolutionaries through the centuries that died at the same age, 37. Parmigianino, Van Gogh, Toulouse-Lautrec, Manet, Rimbaud, Byron, Mozart, Robespierre, Mayakovsky, Piero Manzoni, Basquiat. One can argue if that was just a casualty. Tireless mental and physical workers, often forced to finish their work to pay the debts in order to keep the workshop going, capable of entrepreneurship, to the very exhaustion of their physical resistance. Apprentices, assistants, associates. It is quite impossible that Raphael achieved what he did all by himself. Many great artists have had followers in schools, but no artist has had as much continuators, imitators, and derivative painters as Raphael. How does this influence relate to the contemporary theories of originality? During the Renaissance, people did want a work by Raphael's hand, and they were perfectly aware that they could get something that was conceived by, but not executed by Raphael. His development of a large studio and his unprecedented ability to delegate the labor to his assistants gave a great stimulus to our notion of an original work of art. Nowadays, we are surrounded by reproductive art of one sort or another, but in the 15th century, that is, before Raphael, there was very little art which can be called reproductive, which is just the work of a craftsman reproducing the invention of a greater genius. The dissemination of reproductive art is bound to have the effect of increasing value of original art, and it worked both ways for Raphael. He also promoted the development of reproductive printing. When the engraver Marcantonio Raimondi made a print from one of the Raphael's drawings without his knowledge, Raphael very soon not only supplied him with other drawings, but also made some specifically for him, recognizing the advantage of such a professional association. Raphael himself was influenced by other artists. Still, him being an affirmed star since his earliest years made him certainly more appropriate to imitate. Vasari informs us that even the most competitive and ambitious artists who worked in harmony with, or rather under Raphael, civilized by his good nature, charity, and gentilezza. Raphael made seem the whole business of owing debts highly respectable. On the other hand, there were moments that were categorically opposed to Raphael's figure. The pre-Raphaelites were a movement of the mid-19th century which rejected the centrality of Raphael in the history of art and referred to his painting that took place before Raphael. But the members of this confraternity, such as Dante Gabriel Rossetti, rejecting Raphael, have substantially confirmed his indisputable importance. We can deepen this conversation once you come and see with your own eyes the Borghese Gallery, the Vatican museums, the Uffizi, and the immense and widespread cultural heritage of Italy. I thank the public online that are following us right now.
Yeah, so also a great thanks to the online viewers. And of course, a big thank you so much to Dottora Jelena Jovanović and the staff and the team from Magister Art. And now we would have the opportunity for question and answer.
Actually, if there is time, I would like to deepen another argument, if you agree, that concerns more economical and historical aspects of the art of Raphael and Renaissance and in general, and then to link it to what is the art production today. So the origins of the artistic innovation in Italian Renaissance have been widely examined in historical and art historical studies, but limited emphasis has been given to the role of economic forces in driving of such exceptional achievements in Florence, Venice, and Rome. There is a well-known thesis that the low marginal productivity of capital following a period of sustained wealth accumulation contributes to high investment in art. This is what happens in the contemporary world, but it may have happened in Italy during the 15th century. The Black Death and other devastating plagues of the 14th century produced an inheritance effect. of hedonistic spending as a result of the greater wealth enjoyed by the survivors. There was an increasing demand for art. The real price of paintings increased, and profitability of the profession increased as well. So how could so many great artists flourish in such small towns over such a short period of time? A standard view in art history, as well as in the popular imagination about artists, suggests that the price of paintings during Renaissance was a matter of honor, prestige, and status, and that it was not depending on several other elements that were in fact quite relevant. For example, the objective and quantifiable features such as the surface area of the paintings or the number of figures depicted, or from the rules of a competitive market, where different price reflected different quality between painters as perceived by buyers on their destination and on the painters themselves, such as their artistic school or the age of the execution age. But let's see how a Renaissance workshop looked like briefly. The entry in the artistic guild of a town required an initial investment, namely a training of a few years and the payment of a yearly fee. And this allowed the most talented painters to sell their work in an integrated interregional market in direct competition with each other, and therefore beyond the control of any local guild. Each painter developed a highly personal style, generating some market power from such product differentiation. Pricing changed with quantifiable characteristics of the paintings. Let's examine some of the peak aspects of this, starting with the reputational aspect. Artists had strong incentives to intensify their innovative efforts at the beginning of their careers to gradually build a reputation. Such a reputation could be exploited in the late part of their careers by reducing effort, like, for example, repeating successful figures in their composition or delegated more work to the assistants. For example, increasing the number of figures depicted in a religious altarpiece of saints and angels surrounding a Madonna was not strictly necessary, but represented a commitment to effort and to deliver quality in the composition because figurative subjects were considered more important and were executed by the master and not by his assistants. Another major momentum was the introduction of an incentive-based system. This revolutionary approach developed by the end of the 13th century by masters such as Duccio, Cimabue, and Giotto, who started to organize workshops in an entrepreneurial way and to be paid differentiated fees for each commission as opposed to daily wages. The transition from payment per day to payment per work was a key step in fostering efforts to pursue increasing realism, as well as in the evolution of the modern figure of artist as an innovative entrepreneur. We can say that there was an increasing profitability of the profession associated in turn, as we said, with increasing demand. Therefore, innovation elements in art, such as introduction of linear perspective with a unique vanishing point, the fuga, and of all colors, or a high differentiation of styles, were indeed stimulated by profitability. The strengthening of competition between artists at the beginning of the 15th century emerges with another key event of Renaissance art. This was the contest organized in 1401 by the Guild of Wool Merchants in Florence, Arte di Calimala, for the commission for the bronze relief of a door of the baptistry of St. John. In the competition for the most remunerative commission, the artists started to differentiate their styles and then to sign artworks in order to gain market power for the production of their own workshops. The same assistants were so specialized in reproducing works in the style of the master that precise attributions remained the main concern of modern art historians. Competition between the best artists was open in an interregional market. Painters were regularly moving between regions to paint frescoes or could easily send altarpieces executed in their own workshop to other places. Occasionally, the payment was partially defined only after the work was delivered ex post through an appraisal, il lodo, by arbitrators, as was the case of the Virgin of the Rocks commissioned in 1483 from Leonardo and re-evaluated in 1506 after a long-lasting dispute. The final payment was recorded only in 1508. Other information on the contractual aspects, such as payment installments, length of execution, or pre-existing patron-artist relations should also be considered when dealing with this subject. Some of the workshops of the late Renaissance were real enterprises for the standards of the time, as is the case of Squarcione, Ghirlandaio, and later the entrepreneur par excellence, Raphael. This organization of the artistic activity could definitely generate scale economies and quality improvements in production But there is no evidence that its use changed over time in a significant way. What probably changed over time was the intellectual effort that painters dedicated to prepare preliminary drawings, to reach a higher originality in the composition, to reproduce human figures and landscapes in a more realistic way, to differentiate their styles, and ultimately to gain reputation with the purpose of obtaining better commissions. In this, Raphael was an unprecedented master. Before concluding, I would give the due consideration on the art dissemination based on the tangible and practical terms that we have just mentioned. The circulation of movable works of art and workshops, as well as technically reproductive art, have highly contributed to the dissemination of a visual literacy. The arrival of mechanical movable type printing by Gutenberg introduced the era of mass communication and circulation of information which permanently altered the structure of society, increasing cultural self-awareness in the Renaissance Europe. This increase in literacy and communication started to break the monopoly of the religious and aristocratic elite on learning. It impacted a series of changes in the quality of productive knowledge and its transmission. When starting to work on the Magister Raffaello exhibition, we were driven by the idea of the transmission of knowledge and innovation, as we did when we dealt with other Italian great masters for the exhibitions Magister Giotto and Magister Canova. A pattern of thought emerged quite soon that converged into a method, which is reconstructing the historical, cultural, and artistic context and environments in order to honor the master of innovation, those who have changed the games and who did it in a collective manner, communicating, transmitting, disseminating to next generation of Giottesque, Canovians, and Raphaelesques. The Magister method valorized the immense artistic and cultural heritage left by those magisters, with the aim to reach the broadest possible audience and to innovate socially. That doesn't mean using the last or the most advanced technology of the moment. In Magister Lab, where we do research, the technology is a mean, a tool, not an aim, which means that it is adapted every time in a new way, depending on the context and the content that needs to be spread, as well as the effect that it needs to produce. Hence, again, the point of view of the viewer is pivotal. If we look at the complexity of artistic production, we can easily spot a so-called point of reversibility, as the arts can be reversible or non-reversible. Architecture, sculpture, painting are reversible arts, meaning that a viewer can experience them from different perspectives in a uniqueness of time. Non-reversible arts, such as music or literature, are approached and enjoyed on a timeline from the beginning to the end, like one-way streets. A cognitive experience we aim to, in our productions, counterpose these two levels of approach, which means that every human perception needs to be stimulated, like visual, auditory, scenic, narrative, intellectual, abstract thinking, and so on. And the technology is used exactly to fulfill this aim. The art that we digitally reproduce will always be experienced live and in person somewhere in the world, but when or where this cannot be done, as we are still experiencing today, it can be accessible to everyone, never with the idea to replace the original or the approach to the original work of art, but in a complementary way. The opposition of authentic versus fake doesn't make any sense in the age of technological reproduction, since it is not limited to the reproduction, but proposes the work of art in a context that is different from its original context of enjoyment, and it allows to transfer the work of art in a context of everyday consume. As Walter Benjamin would say, it transferred the reproduction in situations that to an original work of art are not accessible. Therefore, the reproduction's value is enhanced by the contextual factors like intentionality, research that we do, and added meaning converging towards an original, actually consistent and coherent art production tout court. You may convey that what we do can provoke a reaction of Puritan environments, but this is exactly the response we expect in order to have fruitful dialogues and open up to new questions. The Magister Art workshop does precisely that with our creative artistic production, editorial directions, executed entirely in-house, and most of all with our staff. This year has given us several precious indicators for the future, especially concerning new and non-conventional approaches, as the one that we are producing for the Alchemy of the Grace, an exhibition that will take place in Parma next March, that presents an innovative reading on Correggio and Parmigianino and will certainly intrigue those who know them only by their fame. Another avant-garde project will be soon presented. We are honored to be part of Ars Electronica this year, and we hope that our joint work can help new generations to map a new world. Thank you.